We hope you enjoy today's story. There is a popular saying that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I believe this to be true in my life. I have always tried to act with integrity, guided by the golden rule, which states that one should treat others as one would like to be treated. This is my personal motto and the principle I live by. Consequently, I strive to do everything possible to live up to it. However, I am perplexed as to why it is so challenging to live a good life. I have never deceived anyone in my life. Furthermore, I have never engaged in any form of slanderous discourse. In the event of a disagreement with another individual, I present my arguments and facts in a polite and accessible manner. When I am in error, I have always been forthcoming in admitting my mistake. In essence, I conduct myself with honesty and integrity in addressing any challenge that arises. Consequently, I was merely living my life, disregarding any potential warning signs, when the incident occurred. This event proved to be a significant turning point in my life. I had recently returned from a 2-day conference in Texas when my wife caught me off guard as I entered the house. On the day in question, I was attending a conference in Texas. Upon my return home, I was met by my wife, Casey, and our children at the kitchen table. The atmosphere was jovial, with laughter and conversation. I inquired about the source of their merriment, and their demeanor shifted. Casey then gestured towards an empty chair. "Billy, why don't you have a seat?" It was not a question, but rather a command, delivered in a somewhat authoritative manner. I was unsuspecting of anything amiss. I sat down, and she waved a stack of papers in front of my face. "Billy, take these and read them," she demanded, slapping them down on the table in front of me. I was not asking for anything except the. In addition to the aforementioned documents, there are also adoption papers. I am requesting that Jeff adopt the children. I am aware that you want what is best for them, so I am merely asking you to sign this document so that we can proceed. Casey delivered her speech in a seemingly rehearsed manner, appearing as calm as could be. My wife and I have been cohabiting for 12 years. I was presented with divorce papers and forms for the adoption of my 3 children. My son, Devin, regarded me with a slight smirk. Devin was 10 years old. My daughter, Joy, did not even acknowledge me. She was 9 and preoccupied with her iPod. The subject is a 7-year-old child. The eldest son was the only one who offered a response. Patrick explained that his father, Jeff, had a large house, which was a source of joy for him. I observed Casey and the children, noting that they appeared to be experiencing a heightened emotional state. This could be attributed to a number of factors, including premenstrual syndrome, PMS, early menopause, or even bipolar disorder. However, it was unlikely that alcohol was a factor, as there was no indication of intoxication. Instead, it seemed that Casey was expressing her distress through emotional outbursts. This led me to question the rationale behind the divorce proceedings. I was prompted to consider that my lack of reaction was inappropriate. Casey gathered the documents from the table and threw them onto the counter. She then placed a check for half of the money from our bank accounts in front of me. "You can read the papers later," she said. "Here, take your check, Billy. Don't forget it, kids. Come on, get up. Take your father's bags to his car." Casey clapped her hands energetically and shooed them from their seats. I was astonished to discover that she had packed all of my belongings as well. Prior to my arrival, the subject set up an ambush and then suddenly attacked and shot me point blank with a large caliber gun. "Casey, do you truly believe that I would willingly go to a place that I have finally asked her," with a slightly threatening tone. I then proceeded to inform her that her name would be included on any relevant documentation pertaining to the property. I reiterated my stance by raising my voice and reminding her of a crucial detail she had seemingly overlooked. Despite my attempts to remain calm, I was unable to contain my frustration. I demanded to know what had transpired that led to this sudden desire for a divorce. I made it clear that I would never allow her to take my parents' house, and that she would have to leave. Casey rolled her eyes and realized that she would not win this argument. She then changed her orders and instructed the children to pack their belongings, as they would have to leave the property. She abruptly altered her plans and returned home to Jeff. In the hallway, Casey inquired, "Who is this Jeff, anyway?" I observed her displaying clear disdain and contempt towards me. I then looked at my children, who had reappeared in the kitchen, seeking their support once again. My daughter simply yelled at her brothers to hurry up, then turned to me. She said, "Jeff can give us a better life. Besides, Mom loves him, and so do we." My son nodded vigorously in agreement with his sister. I then got up, brushed past Casey indifferently, left the kitchen, and walked to the door. I opened it, and they all grabbed their bags and headed towards. I then observed Casey attempting to gain access to my vehicle. I immediately vocalized my objection, emphasizing that I had purchased the vehicle and that it was registered in my name. I further stated that they should depart immediately, suggesting that they contact their father to arrange for his retrieval of them. In response, Casey and the children cast a final glance in my direction, their expressions marked by a combination of defiance and ridicule. They then proceeded to exit the premises, their departure marked by a collective gesture of contemptuous dismissal. I was overcome with a profound sense of frustration and anger. I had invested significant effort and resources into this family, only to be abandoned by them for a more affluent alternative. In such a situation, any normal person would have reacted similarly. Indeed, I proceeded to consume a considerable quantity of alcohol, resulting in a state of inebriation that could be described as heroic. Ultimately, I passed out on the tile floor next to the washing machine, an occurrence that had never before occurred in my life. My immediate reaction was to express hatred towards the individual in question, who I will refer to as Jeff. However, my anger and disgust extended beyond this person to encompass my former family. I came to the realization that my anger was not solely directed at the wealthy individual in question. I contacted my family, who had evidently decided to betray me. Once I had sobered up the following morning, I arranged to meet with a lawyer I had found online. I scheduled a meeting with the lawyer for noon the following day, as my family had confessed to loving this Jeff so much that I decided to give them what they had asked for. My lawyer reviewed the agreement left by my wife the previous day and advised me to sign it before Casey changed her mind. I duly completed the requisite alterations and the lawyer returned the documents. However, Casey seemed to be so enamored with her wealthy spouse and his seemingly unassailable dignity that she did not. They even demanded child support from me with remarkable swiftness. With a single stroke of the pen, I was no longer a husband or a father. My former family abruptly disowned me, discarding me like a stale crust of bread. This was despite the oft-repeated rhetoric about staying together until the children grew up and left home. The notion of growing old together proved to be an empty dream. 6 months later, the divorce became final. As time passed, I underwent a transformation. I threw myself into my work, returned to college, and earned a master's degree. I then pursued a doctorate. I am now known as Dr. William Capps, with the solid addition of a Doctor of Philosophy and a Doctor of Accountancy. I am aware that many people consider accounting to be a rather uninteresting subject. However, my life overall was rather similar, except for the actions of my former family. Nevertheless, accounting was my chosen field of study. I opened my own office, armed with my doctorate, and employed a strategy of providing high-quality service and personalized attention to affluent clients from the upper echelons of the middle class. Gradually, thanks to word-of-mouth referrals, my client by the end of the second year of my practice, I had established a successful enterprise and had also met a woman named Patty who possessed the qualities I sought in a partner. She was industrious, shared my interests, and, importantly, was adept at managing the household. Patty was slightly taller than Casey, with alluring curves in all the right places. By the end of the 4th year of operation, my firm had grown to such an extent that we needed space to expand the office instead of continuing to rent from someone else. I weighed the future benefits and purchased a 5. The standalone office building was a source of great joy for Patty and me. We held our wedding on the 4th floor, a small but festive occasion for the two of us and the few guests we invited to our intimate celebration. We must have had too much fun at our wedding and the night after it because a few months later, Patty turned out to be pregnant. I would have been gratified to spend more time in solitude with my wife, but I was forced to accept the circumstances that life presented. In the near future, there would be 3 of us, and over the past 6 years, my life had truly been on an upward trajectory. It was therefore unexpected and concerning when I was served with papers for double alimony payments. Casey demanded $3, a monthly payment of $432 was also demanded from me as child support, in addition to the aforementioned sum of $100,000. Apparently, she had calculated this as a missed opportunity for the entire time she was in the process of establishing a close relationship with a high-ranking executive, whose name I do not recall. I could not help but laugh at this news. I had not seen or heard from this executive group in 7 years, and the first thing they want is money. When I handed the papers to my lawyer, he reviewed them. After finishing his laughter, he contacted Casey's lawyer. He had learned from his colleague that Casey was bankrupt and alone. However, she had heard through the grapevine that he had become very successful as the owner of a thriving business. This news wounded her pride. Furthermore, her avaricious instincts were aroused. To her considerable dismay, she also discovered that I had remarried and that my spouse and I had already produced one child, with another on the way. Casey's husband, the same affluent individual named Jeff, was eager to pursue a relationship with her, but he was not enthusiastic about the prospect of family life with her. 3 demanding children led to his abrupt departure. A week later, Casey was served divorce papers. The man, known for his philandering ways, refused to pay child support. To accomplish this, he found a way to invalidate the adoption. Jeff convinced the judge that Casey forced him to sign the adoption papers. The documents presented him with an ultimatum: either he would sign the adoption papers or he would lose everything he had worked so hard for. He was allegedly forced to put his signature on the documents, and now that their marriage was official and all the money that he and his wife had wasted, Casey's next target seemed to be me, the ex-wife. The wife's strategy involved my parents in this matter. It later became apparent that she had been in communication with them since she left me. One could understand my parents' desire to remain involved in their grandchildren's lives. However, my mother and father did not inform me of their knowledge of her continued communication. This was an unpleasant discovery for me. Casey was adept at navigating these interactions. She portrayed herself as a wife who had made an unfortunate error in judgment. My parents were easily convinced by this narrative. Initially, my father approached me. He discussed the importance of forgiveness and the value of doing what is right. He also expressed his belief that, were he in my position, he would strive to reunite the family. In the midst of his discourse, I highlighted the fact that I have since formed a new family unit and entered into a new relationship. I also attempted to remind him of how Casey and the children had treacherously abandoned me, ignoring my arguments as if he hadn't heard them. My father advised me to man up, pull myself together, and fix my marriage with Casey. He also suggested that everything would be fine with Patty and that she could start over. I was simply required to care for the children and provide child support. I regarded my father as irrational for the first time in my life. I lost respect for the elder of the two. Nevertheless, this did not prevent me from personally reaching the door, opening it, and politely requesting that my father leave. My mother then entered the house with a determination and energy that was apparent from the way she carried a large trash bag. My mother presented me with a formidable ultimatum: if I did not take Casey back then, I would have to vacate the premises, thus allowing her and her beloved grandchildren to take up residence. I was incredulous, both at the proposition itself and at the fact that these were my parents' belongings. My company was doing well, so I simply purchased my own house a week after I had to endure this ordeal. I was served an eviction notice, which allowed me a month to gather my belongings and vacate the premises. I did not contest the notice, as the deal to sell my new house was closing the following day. It is noteworthy that when one pays in cash, sellers are often willing to accommodate requests and facilitate the process. My parents returned to their former residence a week later, only to upon their return, Casey and her children promptly took up residence in the property. 2 years have elapsed since that time, and during this period, I have not had any communication with my parents. My daughter Casey and her offspring, Patty and I, were thriving. Our new residence was filled with the sounds of children at play, and our business was flourishing. This year, I was honored with the distinction of being named the Businessman of the Year in our region. I was photographed with the award, and the image was published in the local newspaper. My family was featured in the local newspaper. I accepted the award and, in my acceptance speech, I attributed much of the credit for its achievement to my wife, Patty. Without her support, I told the audience at the ceremonial dinner, I would not have been able to achieve this award. My mother and father unexpectedly joined us during my speech. They were accompanied by Casey, my former spouse. My wife proceeded to the stage, where she publicly labeled me a failed father, portraying herself as a victim and displaying what appeared to be genuine distress. She informed the assembled audience that I had shamefully and cruelly abandoned our children and her. At this point, Casey made the startling accusation that it was Patty who destroyed her marriage. I believe my lawyer must have anticipated this turn of events and prepared accordingly. He seemed to have foreseen that Casey would seize the opportunity to damage my reputation. The lawyer proceeded to publicize the false story by utilizing a remote control to project the relevant material onto a wall in the hall. It is evident that private detectives employ a variety of innovative techniques to gather compromising material on individuals of questionable character. The advanced technologies they utilize in the process are truly astonishing. The blank wall of the hall, which immediately captured the attention of all present, began to display a recording of Casey's conversation with her lawyer. This conversation took place in the parking lot in front of the building. In a discussion held within his office, Casey and his associate outlined the methods through which they intended to nullify the adoption papers that he had signed at her request some time ago. Casey had assured her lawyer that should he succeed in annulling these documents, the distress she had caused him earlier that day would pale in comparison to the consequences he would face when the sought-after documents were discarded. They then proceeded to deliberate on how to manipulate Patty in such a way that she would be drugged and raped. They subsequently planned to send him a video to prove that Patty was unfaithful to him. Subsequently, Casey would arrive on the scene, offering comfort and sympathy, with the intention of reclaiming my affections. This was the plan that had been devised. Additionally, she informed her accomplice lawyer of her manipulation of my parents, rendering them her puppets. Otherwise, they would not have been able to see their grandchildren. At the conclusion of the video, Casey attempted to escape through the side door. However, he was apprehended by the police chief, whose strength was evident in his ability to halt Casey's escape. It is notable that several judges in attendance also demonstrated interest in this matter. I then viewed the incriminating recording, which prompted me to cast a long glance at my disappointed parents. I proceeded to approach my wife and children, assisting them in donning their coats. We subsequently departed the courtroom and proceeded to the street. I kissed Patty, and we all proceeded towards the sea. Upon concluding the arrangements for the children's transportation in the back seat, I was approached by my parents. I did not acknowledge them, and instead took my place as the driver. I proceeded to close the vehicle's door and drive my family home. I did not see them again until I was summoned to court to testify against Casey and her lawyer. Once the formalities were concluded, I was free to speak. Upon exiting the courtroom, I was met by my father, who expressed his profound regret for the circumstances that had transpired. He implored me to consider giving us an opportunity to rectify the situation. He highlighted the emotional distress my absence had caused my children and grandchildren, emphasizing the longing they felt for me and the hardship they endured without a father figure in their lives. He further emphasized the importance of familial unity and reconciliation, appealing to my sense of compassion and forgiveness. I regarded him with a distant gaze and proceeded towards the exit, pausing in my tracks. I informed him that I would consider his proposal. Casey was sentenced to 3 months of imprisonment and 4 years of probation. Her inept lawyer was disbarred for conspiracy to defraud the justice system. Furthermore, the Department of Child Welfare informed me that my offspring from my first marriage would be placed in foster care if my parents or I did not take them into our custody. I informed my parents that they could take in these self-centered children themselves. My father suggested that I might have to forgive them all at some point in the future. He then inquired whether it was truly detrimental for them and my mother to be involved in their grandchildren's lives. Despite our desire to the contrary, we will inevitably be deprived of a significant portion of their upbringing. He expressed his disappointment with your decision to end the marriage and move on. One might inquire as to the fate of us, Billy. Might I inquire as to whether you are so lacking in empathy that you cannot perceive her misstep? My father persisted, and I responded with patient weariness. There is nothing inherently problematic with the desire to be involved in their lives. However, I must respectfully disagree with you. Casey did not err. She was a cold. Those who are heartless eventually face the consequences of their actions. With regard to the children, they willingly chose to leave our home and pursue a relationship with their father. It is important to recall that you previously advised me that there are certain actions in life that cannot be forgiven. You also warned me that the path to destruction is paved with good intentions. Have you forgotten these words? What happened next? You turned your back on me and my mother. In addition, my father also turned his back on us. The reality is that Casey lied, deceived, and turned the children against me. Despite all of this, you still sided with her, which meant that you acted against me. Patty and my family, you now expect me to act as though nothing has changed. Dad, you are mature enough to understand that you made the wrong choice, and now, just as Mom did, you must live with the consequences of your actions. What I have told you about happened 10 years ago. Despite all that happened back then, Casey never learned her lesson. She remarried and attempted to deceive her new husband, just as she did with me. Nothing good came out of her double life, only different consequences of her infidelity. Casey was apprehended in the act of adultery with her latest paramour and subsequently killed. The individual in question was so vehemently opposed to being cuckolded that he tied the lovers to the bed they were having sex on, doused them with gasoline, lit a match, and left. Casey's remains had to be identified by dental records. Our children with Casey have grown up and are now living according to how they were raised. Devin and Patrick are currently incarcerated, while Joy, who had been living with us, came to our home and begged to be part of our family. Patty, a woman of strong moral principles, argued that the wayward mother had negatively influenced Joy's moral development. She urged my parents to welcome the young girl into their family and provide guidance to help her lead a virtuous life. My parents did meet with Patty before they passed away. In their will, they left all their assets to my discretion but requested that I distribute their belongings fairly among all 7 of their grandchildren. Patty and I anticipate the day when we will become parents and owners of a once I have established a home and a family of my own. I intend to relish every moment spent in the company of my beloved wife. I acknowledge that some of you may view Billy as an ungrateful individual, given his apparent lack of effort to preserve the family unit. However, I would like to propose that there are instances when the effort required to fight for a relationship outweighs the potential benefits. I extend my gratitude to those of you who have listened to this discourse until its conclusion. If you found this discussion engaging, I kindly request that you subscribe to our channel, like our content, and leave comments.